Yeah, let's get started for the sake of time. I know you guys have a lot of good stuff going on here. Um, well, great. Pleasure to be here, and want to give everyone a very brief introduction here of Ian. As I mentioned in some of the posts, Ian is a real visionary and a leader in digital transformation. Um, Besides having some incredible degrees behind his name, very dynamic individual with tons of years of experience, over 25 years of experience, spanning strategy, sales, marketing. You're an external advisor at Bain and Company previously, and you're an expert in RPA. And so, Devin, I'll let you take a second to maybe introduce why you wanted Ian on, because you know Ian better than just about anyone on this call. And then I'll let you guys get started with the Q&A.
Cool. Yeah, so this is going to be a casual conversation. Ian and I have talked many times. We have great conversations. So I wanted to expose that to the people who kind of come to these webinars. The reason I'm interested is I feel like we are basically like the new version of what he did. Like we're like young, 20 years behind, 15 years behind Ian in the AI space. I guess you could say AI automation, but more specifically agentics for us. And we're kind of going through some like similar movements to what the RPA era was like, which was the 2010s. And so Ian was one of those guys, leading the way in the RPA time, right? And so there's a lot of similarities. And so what I wanted to do was kind of pattern match, right? What did he do? What worked? What was his experiences like, and then what can we learn from that as we kind of do the exact same thing but with new technology, right?
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you, Ross, for that awkward introduction of all the crap I've done. That's very nice of you to have to soldier through that. And yeah, as you said, Devin, I'm looking for a face emoji thing that sort of like sufficiently shows that I'm old. So that's the best I can find. But yeah. As you said, in 2012, I can give more background when and if it becomes relevant. But ultimately, my background had been solving enterprise problems with the state of the art at the time, which was arbitrage and offshore teams. So I was in the BPO industry, built teams all over the world, hundreds and sometimes thousands of people on a team. And automation then worked its way in. With innovation generally was around like Six Sigma, continuous improvement, lean, Kaizen, etc. And then in 2012, we all were made aware of this concept of automation emulating the work that people do. And it just so happens, and you're doing outsourcing, most of the time enterprises outsource the stuff that they don't think is strategic or particularly special. You outsource the stuff that's routine, mundane, and you can structure into a contract and send far away to people you've never met who you're not sure can even do the work. And that is a perfect framework for also what is automatable: routine, mundane, structured, repeatable. And so then we started playing with RPA before it was called RPA. And that was the beginning of that next chapter of my life, and what we're here to talk about, some of the stuff that I saw along the way.
Yesterday, we talked about kind of like how you got to the point where you got to. Let's basically recreate that conversation.
Yeah. Second verse, same as the first. So yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately what happened, to get into some more of the details, was, so I'm a BPO dork who's wandering around getting excited because I'm running an innovation lab, and all of a sudden the coolest thing is this robot stuff. And so, okay, where can we apply it? And ultimately where you apply it is the clients you had already. And so I was the global head of innovation, at a $1 billion call center company, and we happened to have a deal with Dell, the computer company, and it was in their supply chain and logistics. It was order management, and we had people doing order management for them. And so we started to rummage through that process and look to see, can you actually automate this stuff? And lo and behold, we felt perhaps we could. In the old days, you solutioned the same way that you were used to solutioning, which was, okay, how many people do you have doing this? Okay, we'll have this many people do it, but over here. And then all of a sudden you're faced with this robot thing where people were coming out with with ratios of a robot can do the work of X number of people, because all of the tired narrative of they don't sleep, they don't take vacations, they don't need to go to the bathroom. And so you come up with this really overly simplistic ratio that says one robot can do the work of 4.2 people. And then you got to actually deploying it, which then takes process rigor. Long story short, it worked. It was, I believe, one of the very first applications of RPA in BPO. And to continue using three-letter acronyms, we set up a RPA COE, which was the first RPA COE in BPO. And we had a bunch of people in Chennai, and it was recognized by all the analysts, and the company I worked at was put first on the very first sort of rankings of RPA leaders in the outsourcing industry. And that's where we kind of got our start. And then we ultimately realized what happened was people would come to us and say, that's like, I understand you're an arbitrage shop and you've got cheap people, but what I really want to know about is this robot thing you're doing. And so my partner in crime, my friend David Brain, and I decided, well, there's something here. People want to know what we know about this specialty. So we left our day job, started an RPA consultancy in 2014, and then went on serving generally very large enterprises for the next 4 years. We grew that company from an idea to about 300 consultants in 4 years, and then we ended up selling it in 2018. So that was my RPA journey. And then after that, I did all sorts of like teaching and writing and instructing and advising and all the other stuff. Poor Ross just had to read out loud, but all predicated on what I learned while in the trenches at that RPA consultancy.
Cool. So 2014 to 2018. Let's get into like the detail on scaling that. So what I'm curious about right now, there's obviously like a huge gap in AI between like your layman or your your person who's just like too busy to kind of keep up with all of the hype and the noise that's going on.
Yep.
And the people who are trying to keep up with all the hype and the noise, right? And something that we're experiencing is, it's a challenge to communicate some of the weird like elements of like working with LLMs with folks who just haven't worked with them a ton. And so I'm curious, like you guys were pretty early in RPA. I imagine there was a huge gap there.
Yes.
How did you guys like break into that and communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, and now is far worse than it was 10, 12 years ago, in that I wake up with anxiety and fear of missing out constantly because people like you put out amazing content on YouTube almost daily. And I think like, my gosh, I'm falling so far behind and all these new things are happening. And, Manus drops and 5 minutes later, people have these like amazing videos of their tests of it. There's a very small fishbowl of geeks who are really into the details and looking at, as we said, in an earlier discussion, looking at like the torque and the horsepower and the like all of the engineer elements of like how many tokens does it take and how many like pieces of data does this. Most people don't know. They don't give a crap. First and foremost, they have way too much time, or they have way too little time because all of their time is taken up focusing on their day job. And so in 2014, there was that sort of noise a lot less because it was a smaller community. But you'd show up and you'd say to someone like, "So, I want to talk to you about RPA," and they'd go, "What is that?" And you're just like, "What is that? I mean, how can you not know RPA? Like, it's all that anyone in my feed is talking about." And at the end of the day, most people don't have any idea. Now, ChatGPT did this community a service by just making the concepts of some of this AI really easy to grasp and to tinker with. And so that is a massive accelerator in those discussions. But at the end of the day, if you say AI agent or agentic to anyone these days, most people don't know what you're talking about. And so ultimately you need to always bring it back to the fundamentals, which is like, what is keeping them up at night and what gets them promoted? Right. And that's just outcomes. That's a more efficient operation. That's a reduction in churn. That's increase in top line. That's whatever metrics that guide their lives on a day-to-day basis. That's all that matters. All of the sexy stuff that you're playing with as far as AI agents, if it can't address that, and you can't speak that language first and then backward engineer into how AI can help you achieve that, then you're just peddling the sexy shiny stuff. And oftentimes and don't get me wrong, that's a great way to get into a discussion. That's a great way to possibly get someone to buy a first license or project with you, because they also have a fear of missing out. But at the end of the day, what'll keep you around and what'll keep them happy and keep them paying you is if you focus on solving the problems they face on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think what makes sense is to dive into like your business model. So right now, like we get a ton of questions about pricing, business model. How do you engage with clients like commercially?
So what we did, and it's interesting. I found it interesting. 12 years ago, we were a consulting shop. So we would price our time as a consultant. We had talent, and we didn't want to commit to a particular outcome, right? We weren't, this is because in a lot of cases, this is so early and young. Like if I'm building you a house, we built a lot of houses. Like I can get a pretty good estimate of what it's going to take, how much material it's going to take, how long it's going to take. In some of these realms, it became very hard to do that until we got more experienced. So you sort of went time and material at first. Then as we started to build a bit more of a sort of a set of rules of thumb, we started to be able to project price things. Some of our largest clients, we moved to what we called a T-shirt model. And ultimately, the project is small, medium, or large. And sometimes small is a little bigger than small. Sometimes large is a little smaller than large. And that'll all sort of work itself out over time. But if we were to spend all the time it took to just really nail down exactly how much effort there is, we're spending most of our time doing that and not actually just getting on with serving you and making things happen. And so you have to develop a level of trust, and they have to trust you that you're not going to just fleece them and say everything's large. But we moved to that model. Then there's always the sort of like transaction-based or outcome-based. We talked about that. I mean, people have been talking about outcome-based for a millennia. The problem with outcome-based is it tends to is not about the model. It's about the environment in which the model works. Is I did what you did for me, make all the impact we just measured, because we had this other initiative over here, and that actually helped too. So I don't want to give you all the credit. And also, I don't want to give you insight into my metrics to help you calculate what the outcome was, because like, of course, you're going to try to fleece me and use it to your own benefit. So outcome takes this intense amount of transparency that always is a struggle to make work.
Yeah. I know the lead gen people struggle with that because, is it because you're a good salesperson, the client, or not? Is it because you have a good product? Whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I wish you'd have better trust with partners to do that, because I think it puts sort of a mutual motivation in place where you both want to just do a great job, but there's sort of the principal agent challenge always in services that they just think you're trying to screw them. Yeah. And so it's like putting a prenup in at the beginning is just, why are you putting it in? Because we feel like we might need it. And that sort of I don't know, it just kind of ruins things from the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. So yesterday we had a good conversation about niche, whether or not to niche down. That is like, common talk on the street. You got to pick a niche, right? And I have my own reservations on like niching down via like an industry. But again, every other VC we talk to, every other successful entrepreneur we talk to says, find one solution for one industry, one profile. But my feeling is that this is a little bit different, right? We like in SaaS, it makes sense a playbook got developed over the course of 10, 20 years.
Mhm.
And then you could kind of run that playbook for specific industries or niches. We're not even at a point where
Yeah.
there's a playbook set for agentics or even AI automation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to dig in on that?
Yeah, niches make sense if your heritage is predicated on a niche, and by that I mean if the last thing you did, the last role you played, or the last startup that you built was focused on serving the insurance market, or MSPs, or the property management companies, then you have a Rolodex and you have a context and a framework to go sell the next thing to that community, and that makes a ton of sense. But as we had said, what we're doing right now is we're establishing frameworks and best practices, because this is a lot of new sitting on a lot of traditional. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you go back to outcomes, right, what we're trying to do for clients is we're trying to make operations happen more efficiently. And what we're bringing to them is a lens and a way of looking at their operations and assessing each atomic particle in that scan to say, that one I can't do differently because tech's not ready yet, but this one we can, because LLMs can do A, B, or C. Or because Agentics enables us to do something else. That's a horizontal, right? That's an understanding of the application of a capability set, and whether the atomic task has to do with onboarding a new employee or like transacting a bill of lading for a supply chain or anything else. I'd almost say that doesn't matter. And I know that's sacrilegious because there are very specific knowledge sets and understandings and rules and whatever else per every industry vertical. But at this stage, I mean, as we said yesterday, we would always describe ourselves as masters of process. And the process wasn't your specific vertical process. The process was our ability to look at your operation, identify opportunity, and then help you redesign your process to enable it to best be digitized with the tools available to us at the time. So
Yeah. So like what you're saying is your niche can be your process, right? And you can map that process or quote unquote trade secrets, if we're talking like legal IP,
Right. Yeah.
to kind of whatever, right? You had a hammer and the nail analogy yesterday that I thought was good, where it's like we have a hammer, anything that looks like a nail we can take care of pretty much.
Yeah.
Right.
But just be cautious that just because you have a hammer doesn't mean everything is a nail.
Right.
And that's an easy way to, especially the hype and the energy right now. Like there's a very new shiny hammer in the toolkit. That is very exciting. If your algorithm feeds you all of the stuff that mine and everyone's on this call likely does, right? I've got to be using Agentic. So like, what does DeepSeek mean to me now? Like, Manus, crap, I got to move to that, and now I've got to do this and that, and like it's just a constant influx of the next thing. But yeah, a lot of and just to get real antiquated about this, in my day, enterprises didn't operate on all web-based applications. You had to handle mainframes and COBOL shit and screen scraping, and you had to get through Citrix because we were trying to digitize work that was offshore already. And so you were looking at flat screens rather than data fields. And so those components meant that this was complex and hard. Right now we're simplifying it by saying if there's an API, we can automate it. Well, the world has, I don't think the world moved on in the last 10 years. There are a bunch of APIs, but there's still a whole bunch of legacy that requires just a different way of doing things. That is a screw, not a nail. You can't hit that and get the same results.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people, Maya in particular, is interested in what you're doing now.
What am I doing now?
Yeah, I think that's a question for you.
Well, it's like a therapy session now. What is yeah, so ultimately when I was very lucky, right? I was in the right place at the right time. I understood arbitrage and outsourcing, and had done it for a while, had designed really large, complex solutions. right? We talked about this. The last true BPO deal I did was a $250 million deal. It was 1,000 people. We migrated them to 5 delivery locations. We ran innovation sort of contests and operations throughout it all. It was a beast. And then we pivoted over to RPA, and we did it at the right time for no other reason than just luck. We were running an innovation lab in an industry that got hit by this news, and we thought, that sounds fun. Let's try it. The outcome was I have some ability to, take some time off and reflect on what it is that I learned and what energized me and what I found fun. And also what laws of physics never change. And so when you do all that reflecting, then you realize that, while technology is amazing and AI truly has gotten quite a bit more powerful than it was a decade ago, it is not a panacea. And in fact, giving it the credit that it can do everything will cause all sorts of disruption. And so people still matter. And so this concept of a hybrid in which you leverage the world-class talent we can tap into to do human in the loop, to do design, context, human in the loop, and ongoing support and iteration. And you use AI, and I'll refer to everything as AI for a moment, AI to do everything from basic workflow automation to the more esoteric sort of data analysis and content creation and some of the autonomy elements of where we're getting to with agentics. If you combine those things, you get some pretty powerful solutions that solve people's problems. And so that's what we're looking at, is how do you respect the heritage of 2 different, often parallel trends and combine them in a way that actually makes an impact for end customers. So best of both worlds. And so that's what I mentioned him, but David Brain, my co-founder of the RPA firm, and I are together still, and working on this sort of hybrid concept of what we can do for enterprises that leverages really both of our collective skill sets.
Yeah. This concept has been tossed around by just like a couple of people with like clarity, right? Like some people kind of touch on it, but I've only really talked to like 2, maybe 3 folks who are keying in on this. And we got a project proposal that was like, hey, we have a ton of these like executive coaches. They do webinars, and in their community, they have a lot of people ask questions, right? Q&A about the webinar, or asking for certain clips from the webinar, or whatever.
Yep.
And what he wanted to do was like basically create a chatbot that spit out those clips. But part of the process was to create the clips. Like we needed,
Yep.
And so like there was this whole flow where like we would basically set it up to where someone in the Philippines could just chop the clip, put it back into the system, and the system goes and it becomes like a RAG agent ultimately.
Yep.
I see a lot of things could move in that direction, but when I start to really think about it, it seems like limited, right? And maybe my imagination is just not is not working well right now, but like give me some examples on use cases for this type of workflow.
Yeah. Well, so if you go back to, does anyone remember defragmenting their hard drive, where it had all those little cubes and they were all sorts of different terrible colors like black and red, and then you could turn them all beautiful green because you defragged it? I think of that image when I think of the way we used to automate workflows, because you'd go in and you'd map out a workflow, which was usually quite linear, although we know they're not as simple as that. And you'd figure out that you could automate 40% of that workflow with the tools available to you at the time. But it was never with the first 40%, right? It wasn't toward the last 40%. It was this piece, that piece, those 2 pieces, this piece, that piece, this. And so it was kind of like that defragment image. And so ultimately, it doesn't necessarily help an enterprise if you can digitize 40, 50, 60, 70, 90% of a process when it's mattered through the whole end to end, and there's still humans playing roles in it. And that was the first generation of automation. That was RPA. We would go in and we'd build these very complex solutions that did some of the stuff, but not all of the stuff. And so they still had to have humans in the loop, and that it's like rejecting a donor organ is when you put that in place in situ in an operation at a client. Sometimes it just didn't work. They didn't understand their role as the sort of the carbon twin to their new digital twin colleague. So move forward, more and more stuff is automatable now, but end-to-end solutions almost always will still be some concatenation of human and so I mean everything from let's like hire to retire, right? Like talent acquisition, onboarding, and ongoing support of your staff. There needs to be humans built into that. It can't be so cold as to just have robots seek out, evaluate, and then vet, and then onboard, and then you got to have humans in that mix. It's a process that's a cost center to a business. They do it because they have to, but not because it adds to the top line. So if you can give them that capability back, and honestly, they don't care what percentage is, they shouldn't care what percentage is AI and which percentage is human intelligence. Let's call it HI. They shouldn't care. And it should be up to you to deliver a service at service levels agreed upon, and maybe some insight that comes from it. That was what we did in BPO. Right? They didn't care if the person was tall or short or fat or skinny. They just wanted the work done. And so, every imaginable HR process end to end requires that. Supply chain logistics processes have that. Finance and accounting processes, you need eyes on elements. And depending on the type of trade, like in mortgages, for instance, you still need mortgage officers who are certified in a particular state to do something. So some processes force humans into the loop because they require them.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, as long as it's not seen as strategic to a company where they want to retain it. And so again, back to if it met the lens of I can outsource that because I don't care as much about it, I just need it done well. That's where we're hunting, and that's where I think the opportunity for just a solution in a box is, where you get to decide how much of that is an N8N workflow plugged into the APIs for the systems they use, and how much of it is a hamster in a wheel making the same outcome happen, and they don't need to see which one is making the work happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm going to do a roundabout thing to get to Maya's question here about reusability.
Okay.
So like right now, I think what we're seeing a lot of is basically people creating traditional SaaS products with LLM features, right? Like the LLM basically became a new feature set for software platforms that exist today. That's the phase we are at right now, in my opinion. To me, it seems like the technology is going to lead to a much larger paradigm shift in the digital landscape, the software landscape, just across the board, right? Like the way SaaS looks today, it won't look tomorrow, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
It's more than just a new feature set that we can play with. And so obviously people build SaaS products because they're high margin, you can scale them a lot faster, right? And because you have a out-of-the-box solution that can apply to multiple different customers, or the same type of customer, but there's multiple of them.
Yeah.
And so like you have that reusability like baked in, right? This is a product you can use and whatever. With Agentics, it's interesting, right? One, it's not fully baked yet. And two, like everyone's workflows are slightly different. A lot of them are like very much the same, but a lot of them are slightly different. So reusability, even if it's kind of like the same quote unquote system, the integrations, the steps at play, the knowledge base, the data, it's always slightly different.
All special.
Yeah. So I'm curious about RPA, right? Obviously, you guys kind of found a groove with certain types of clients, I imagine.
Yeah.
How much reusability was there available to you?
Yeah, none. I think the message was that there was some, that you'd create app stores and reusable like workflows and stuff like that. But It pains me to say this, but so every client used to tell me how special and different they were, and we'd try to tell them that they weren't, but they are.
Yeah.
Darn clients being special and different. And it's not a good special and it's not a good different. It's just a special and a different, just because every enterprise is a collection of its sort of evolution or evolutionary steps, right? It's a collection of who started it, when they started it, where they started it, what tool they started it on, what company they bought and integrated into the company that they now become. And just everybody has it's sort of this multivariate equation that can turn into infinite permutations of a final answer. Is that we used to be a HubSpot shop, and then we moved to Salesforce, and we were using Marketo, and then we added this instead, and then we bought a company that was also using 6 Sense, and then we had a database that someone had in there, and that stuff just ripples out. And so in a lot of cases, what's reusable is sort of your ability to understand their scope and their need. And so you kind of want to keep the same team around to some degree, but could you out of the box pull out an HR RPA process and use it for the next client? It would almost be harder to edit an existing one than to build a new one from scratch. We did the work absence management, where an employee leaves for sickness or medical leave, family medical leave, or maternity leave, and they get paid from two sources. They get paid from their insurance and the state. And we did that for Kaiser Permanente. And it was insane. I described it as like summiting Everest. We had no idea how complex this project was when we set out to do it. But that was an automation in their work absence management department that had just thousands of rules and all sorts of different permutations and steps and decisions and systems, because it was predicated on your job type, your leave type, your state, your tenure, the union that you belonged to, and so could you take that to the next large healthcare company that had similar job types, union types, leave types? Maybe, but that thing was so complex, you'd be unpacking it most of the project to then just start again. So anyway, so I guess reusability I struggle with. Now SaaS, to your point, SaaS is a standard sort of vanilla thing that you can just supposedly deploy and everyone has to adapt to. And you're right, that's kind of a pain in the ass. I don't talk about this very often, but my first job out of college was at PricewaterhouseCoopers as a PeopleSoft implementation something. And those big old ERP days, you just rock up with like 20 consultants and work for years to customize ERPs to the needs of a client. And it was great for frequent flyer miles and hotel points. So that was cool. And it was great for the big companies that did these projects. So SaaS was there to sort of compete against those massive consulting boondoggles that existed because of ERP, but it absolutely constrained you and didn't care about your particular permutations and needs.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I want to touch. So I don't know if anybody listens to All In, but Chamath went on a little thing last week about how SaaS essentially siloed specific roles and has led to kind of like this explosion in like the administrative layer in a lot of organizations, from like the government to like businesses. And I kind of agree, because now it's like, oh, you have to earn a certificate to work with this platform, and now you're a specialized person on this platform, and thus that gives you some form of value, which is real value, because there's a learning curve on like most of these platforms, right? And so like your skill set becomes your ability to work with like said SaaS platform, which is like very interesting, I think. The other thing I'll touch on is the RPA. One of the things that I think AI might unlock for us when all the protocols are set and we're at a place where kind of the foundation is there, is those like step-by-step workflow automations are way more flexible. So like you're working with Kaiser, you move on to the next massive healthcare company, because it's an agentic workflow, it can adapt, right, and reason and make those decisions. I think we're not quite there yet, but that to me is like when we fully have reached like, okay, yeah, this is like the huge unlock that we're waiting for, right?
Yeah, which would be cool if you could isolate, right? If you could isolate task from data, all right? Because they don't want you building a small language model off of their stuff and then moving it, and especially in healthcare where, I mean, they can roll out HIPAA as a reason to not let you touch anything. But you're right. You're absolutely right that if it's more just the concept of the steps and the logic and the reasoning behind, and you can take that with you, that could be very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. That's why it's interesting. Like, you know, some of the challenges that we run into is extracting that subject matter expertise from people in a way where we can develop a framework out of it, rather than a step-by-step instruction set, right? That could just constrains you like way too much.
Yeah, the SME thing is another reason why I have faith in a hybrid solution, is that for 10 years, and it's just a, you know, sort of Venus Mars kind of concept of, you know, configuration specialists are from Venus and subject matter expert / process owners are from Mars. Is when you sit down with somebody within an operation and they say, okay, you're going to talk to Janet because Janet is our onboarding HR specialist. She knows everything about the system and she's been doing it for 10 years. But Janet doesn't know, in this case, Agentics. She doesn't know why you're asking what you're asking or what you mean. And you don't have time to educate her into your nomenclature. You're just asking her, like, what do you do next? Okay, gotcha. Is there any time you do it differently? Okay. And so the number of times we design like the solution design document, we get them to sign off on it and say like, yep, that's what we do. That picture shows me exactly what I do on my day-to-day job. And then it comes to turning it into a configuration, and it was always wrong. Always wrong, because like, oh, well, I said that, but I didn't mean that. I meant, right? Or like, that's not actually how we do it. Or we forgot about how like this only happens this time and not that time. And so, getting that information out of a human's brain is intensely difficult. And I mean, now I just sound like I'm whining, but it just, that's an element of, it's not as easy as you can sit down with a subject matter expert, because you got to remember that they have a different set of skills and come from a different sort of background, and you just need to know that when you're working with an enterprise. And perhaps the learning ability of large language models will serve well in multiple places. It'll serve you well in that interrogation stage of just asking questions, and it can sort of seek out additional answers you might forget to look for, and then it can also fill in the gaps afterwards and just say, we weren't told this, but you know, I'm going to use my digital common sense and infer that what we want to do is this next step. I'll check with someone, but then once they confirm that I'm right, then I build that into my rule set. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to go down the list of questions here. It looks like people have been filling up the chat, which I like.
Pick the easy ones.
You can handle these. Okay, this one's from Daniel. From your RPA days to Agentic AI now, what's the one foundational principle businesses absolutely need to rethink to stop threatening or to stop treating AI as just a tool and start building a future where it's a partner? And what's the first step they should take to get there?
That's not an easy one. It shows like one of the best questions, one of the hardest ones. I'll build off the word tool, because what happens in the past and is happening today is there's specialization within enterprises, and I think that will spell pilot and proof of concept, which spells death. And by that I mean every company has a continuous improvement team or center of excellence, and then RPA came along and they established an RPA center of excellence, which didn't talk to the continuous improvement team, because come on, those guys. And then we started a machine learning team, which of course didn't speak to the other two teams, because like those guys are knuckle dragging idiots, and we're up here doing like esoteric complex stuff. And then you had process mining and process discovery. You had intelligent document processing, which kind of got glommed into what you then launched as an intelligent automation center of excellence. And then everybody wanted one because they didn't want the finance team to have complete control over it. And then IT learns about it and tries to grab it back because that sounds like IT and not operations. And why the hell do you think you deserve to own this? And so if that crap keeps on, we'll have, we have LLM centers of excellence, and then we'll have agentic centers of excellence. And the only reason agentics can work and work so much better than all of those predecessors is because it's able to work across all of those realities, right? It has a bunch of data in it. It can make sense of it even if it's unstructured. It can understand and then actually execute on workflow and process steps. It can probably even help you to streamline them and to do continuous improvement. And it creates a whole bunch of insight and analytics that you can then make strategic decisions based on. And if you don't have a hybrid team working on that, then it's going to be yet another sort of little functional fiefdom that is operating in isolation. And and it's fine to begin with if you want some champion in the organization to be the one who does it first, and they happen to be the CFO, and so he picks a process that is close to him. But if you want an agentic operating system across the organization, you need to think bigger.
Yeah, I agree. Good answer. Someone asked, how do you go about pricing these? And I think some kind of like, what obviously, like, you have your model for pricing RPA. We're still in the process of figuring out how to exactly price agentics, right?
Yeah.
What are some similarities you see there? And then what do you see are like the unique challenges with this kind of technology?
So the similarities are it's still specialists bringing their expertise to bear to help an enterprise. And so you should be paid what you have earned and deserve to be paid for all of the skills you've developed. And so I think that feels like a consulting project, and you should bill as much as you possibly can at consulting rates, because believe me, the large enterprise or the large consulting firms are billing $1,000 a day, $2,000 a day for kids who are reading the manual under the desk. So that, I think, is one way to look at it. There was a second part to that question.
Yeah, the differences, any unique traits with the AI space that makes it harder to price.
I remember where, and yeah, so the thing that makes it a little harder, I think, is this concept around democratization. In the RPA days, the RPA vendors used to say, this stuff is so easy, a business analyst can do it. And so a client would buy it, and then they'd be really annoyed that they couldn't do it. And then you'd have to bring in a service provider like me, and they were just pissed that they even had to talk to me. I'm like, you know what, shit, I was told I didn't even need you, and now you're here, and now you want to charge me money? This is garbage. And so it's really hard to start a relationship when, like, the other side of the party doesn't even want to be there because they were told they didn't need to be in this relationship in the first place. The problem you face is the citizen development movement, and this idea of low code and no code, and that everything is quite so easy. And the good thing about ChatGPT is it made it a Google prompt, right? It was easy for anybody on earth to interact with a large language model, and so they start off with this perception that it should all be so easy. And if you log into Instagram, you get kids in their parents' basements launching unicorn companies and building iPhone apps and creating all sorts of other things in 15 minutes because they used Lovable or whatever, right? And so the narrative is that this is so easy. And so you got to overcome that narrative by saying, yeah, like, tinkering is easy, but actually building robust enterprise grade and reliable systems is not, and it never has been, and it likely never will be.
Yeah, especially when you start working with multiple parties and teams are involved in permissioning, and the data is unstructured, yet needs to be siloed. Yeah.
My cheesy saying 10 years ago was RPA is not about the robot, and what I meant by that is, we were using Blue Prism, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, nice, those things. But the complexity of a program was all about stakeholder management, communications, clarity of vision, purpose, design of solution, all that other crap. Like that's what got in the way of a project actually happening. It had nothing to do with the technology.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next. We got 12 minutes. I think we can get through. So Alex said, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Automation/AI within the BPO world has generally had issues with pricing given BPO's legacy FTE models.
Yes, exactly.
With the onset of agents, LLMs, etc., or LAMs, large action models.
Yep.
What does your crystal ball have in it for how this next wave of digitization looks with BPO? Massive impacts here to potential stability of automation, ability to handle long tail of work/automation versus just happy path, etc., that start to increasingly look more like the true digital labor that we've been selling. So,
dude, Alex, where's Alex? Alex knows stuff. That's a deep question, what the challenge is in any industry. An industry is defined not by necessarily the things it does, but how it's rewarded for doing them. And so BPO is an FTE-based operation. That's all it knows. It sells FTE-based. It responds to RFPs. It puts together, the providers put together FTE-based solutions. When it comes time to pick the winner, procurement normalizes based on headcount cost effectively. If you come up and say, like, we got a crazy special idea that's going to be like kind of disruptive and isn't the thing you asked for, they'll be like, I can't compare that, so I got no interest in entertaining it. And it sounds risky, or it sounds uncertain, or it sounds like you're going to make a bunch of money off of us that we're not aware of. And so my bet is that BPOs are set to be disrupted. And I firmly believe there will be a new BPO. It's what I'm hoping to build. It's what I'm actively working on, is how do you combine the best of both worlds of cutting edge AI, reasonable, capable, safe, with the world-class talent, and all, stitched together with a contract structure and a commercial structure that rewards innovation and evolution. BPO never did. And I can talk about that for hours, but innovation and the incentives to transform a solution once it was sold in BPO does not exist.
How would you even implement that? Yeah.
I mean, again, that $250 million deal that I sold and that I ran I stayed on for 2.5 years for my sins, and a huge component of that solution was predicated on innovation and transformation that we could never make happen. Because the client just wasn't comfortable sharing any of the spoils of innovation. It was impossible to have discussions with them, and that has to be able to happen for any ongoing orchestration and evolution to happen. And so that's why I think BPO is great. It's not going away. I mean, I've been in BPO for 15 years, and everyone constantly says it's going to go away because you're going to be able to AI everything. That is not true. That's a hyperbolic, oversimplistic statement. There is still a huge value to humans, but BPO will be relegated to some of the more traditional, sort of simple delivery models, and they'll be a disruptor to evolve the space. So
yeah,
great question.
That's interesting. Seems like a lot of things are going towards gig work, even white collar.
And by gig, I mean, you just mean a discrete work agent that gets specific pieces of end-to-end process done. And then the complexity, and the complexity you face and you walk through in your videos, is you're stitching together a bunch of little gig workers, right? One of the gig workers is the brain, and one of them is the writer, and one of them is the data analyst, and one of them is that's gig work. It's just, I mean, you're just calling on APIs to your gig worker, and there's ultimately going to be no difference to having human elements into that stitched together image where you can actually gig work where humans make the most sense.
Yeah. There's there's a lot of overseas roles in BPO that are already getting eliminated by AI. And so sometimes I wonder, all of those markets like the Philippines and a lot of LATAM places, India, where they basically are propped up by BPO. it seems like 50 to 75% of those folks with the skill sets they have today, are going to be, I just try to figure out like what skill sets remain that are going to be needed versus not. And then also you could run into a scenario where like your system that has a human in the loop process maybe connects to, the expert that you're trying to tap into. They have their own system that's just like agentic, right? And so there is never a human touching it. Anyway, just teasing out like potential issues or whatever.
And if you tie it back to the SaaS question and the ERP question, I mean, SaaS might have been constrained and might have prevented you from being customized, but it sure as hell made things simpler. This future in which, like, Zuckerberg's, there'll be hundreds of millions to billions of agents, and there'll be more than people, and they'll be like everywhere in every company. That sounds awesome and like a dumpster fire of complexity that will just create all sorts of technical debt and breakdown if you don't coordinate it well. Because organizations are complex and they are slow to adapt and move, and they are constrained by all the different limitations. And if you dump just thousands upon thousands of little geniuses into that organization, that's not going to make anything better.
No.
I think it's going to need to be orchestrated in a way that still has to have a wrapper around it. If it's not SaaS, it's something. But that's where enterprises are going to need a lot of help.
Yeah. So we got another question here. We got 5 minutes, so let's try to answer these. This one's from Michael. I like the idea that a lot of this agentic automation is just another expansion in the process engineering world. Do you think that's a good way of seeing the new field?
Yeah. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, our old framework at the RPA company was SAVO, and S was simplify, A automate, V virtualize, and O was orchestrate. So simplify, automate, or virtualize, orchestrate. The simplify was we can pave a cow path, right? We can just go and digitize the thing you do today, but it didn't serve anybody well. Right now, with the capabilities you have, you look at what you're doing and you re-engineer that process. You simplify it, you amplify it, what have you. Do that first. And then automate it with whatever tools are available to you. That's awesome. The virtualize was then tap into whatever other resources you needed. So offshore or gig, as you said. And then orchestrate was imperative, which is whatever you do today is going to be old tomorrow. And so build in that level of flexibility so that you can evolve when necessary and when the benefits justify the effort, to keep it always fresh. So I don't think this is any different. I just think your tool set for the A and the V in that acronym are just so much richer now, which is cool.
Yeah, I completely agree with that take. Okay, next one. I'm going to skip the color question, Michael. We can ask that later. Andrew Gilgan. Purple. What tool/extension do you think could unlock significant improvements for agents? For example, self-improving memory, greater reasoning, more tools. Gil's been really on the memory train the last week and a half, but yeah.
I am not smart enough to answer that question.
Fair enough. Yeah, you kind of got to be in the weeds. Okay, another one from Michael here. This is kind of a business question, but I really want to ask from the thought process side. Did you ever have experiences with a client whose automation request ended up being too difficult or unrealistic the more you dug into it? Like their process was way more chaotic than they let on during discovery meetings. Do you have any stories of how you made the choice to navigate that versus ultimately declining the project?
Yeah, processes are always way more complicated than they say at the beginning. They're way more complicated than they know. The process will always be more complicated than even the process owner knows. And so you have to sort of go in with that framework. And the challenge again was the narrative versus the reality, which was and I remember I was building a company back when IBM Watson was inundating televisions with commercials, speaking to like Serena Williams and various other people. People had the expectation that AI could do everything. And so I used to go into sales pitches and have clients say to me, quote unquote, "Why do I need RPA if I can just use AI?" And that meant nothing because AI to this day, it doesn't mean anything. It's not a definition. You can't point to that and go, that one's AI, right? Like it's a concept, it's a bunch of algorithms, a bunch of capabilities. And so there's always going to be dissonance, and now more so, right? Because every Silicon Valley startup and every mega firm is on this, Salesforce and Facebook and Google and ServiceNow and SAP, and they all have agents. And so everybody believes that they can do absolutely everything. And so I don't know if this serves you well, but we had a client one time that said that what made us so good back in the RPA days was, quote unquote, we sold them what they needed and not what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to sell someone what they need because they're really willing to part with money for what they want. And so what they want and what they're seeing in the narrative is this fully end-to-end agentic solution that can learn and be autonomous and whatever else. And you know that that's the trajectory, but that's not the reality. And so a lot of this is a consultative sale where you're going to have to work with them. Because we would sit down with a client and say, like, that's just not possible. We pissed clients off, but they'd come back and say, like, we know you had our best interest in mind. You weren't just trying to sell us shit to sell us. You actually would walk away from projects because they weren't doable. And you owe it to them to atomize it down and educate them and say, like, look, this is what we can do. And at the end of the day, back to the very first point, what is the point? Why are you doing this in the first place? It's not to just say you have it. It has to be because you have trouble finding talent because there's a talent shortage, or you are facing the pressures of inflation, or because, and this can help you address that need by creating an outcome, and let's make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think you probably just dished out a semester or a year's worth of business school knowledge here with some of the consulting. I have a lot of friends in business school or just getting out, and they said that like half of the classes are about just communicating with the client and teasing out the core problem. And, when you're in those meetings, how do you make sure that they don't feel that you're, trespassing on their area, but you're there to help? And, firsthand experience is always best. Yeah.
Oh, and that's where masters of process came in when we would say it, because it means, like, I don't know your stuff. Like, I know a little bit about it, but I don't even want to presuppose that I do, because you take that as arrogant, and I don't want to come across as obnoxious. So I want to come across as like, look, I got a specialty in this stuff over here, which you're not doing. I am. So that's what I know. But your realm, dude, you're the master of that. And then there's a degree of respect in your peers, and then you can have discussions.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's business school is interesting right now too. I'd love to know what else they're learning, because, man, the world's changing so fast. Like, what are they teaching?
Yeah, they might be screwed.
I was the TA of information systems, a course at my business school. I don't remember any of it, but I do remember that it certainly wasn't. It wasn't preparing me for this stuff. So,
yeah, no shot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're about 2 minutes over. I think this was a good talk.
Yeah.
Are you going to hop into office hours here?
I have to run, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'd hoped I could move something, but I didn't. But thank you so much, Devin. You were a star. You were educating. I've found so much value in the videos you put together. Keep doing that. I know it's never easy, but you're building out loud, and I get to watch your thought process as you redesign and adapt to the realities of this stuff, and it's been invaluable to me. Thank you for being you.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for spending the time with us. I think people got some value out of it.
Very cool. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Follow me on LinkedIn. Get in touch if you need me. Hit that like button.